The Sun and Wayward Stars by ThBiButterfly. Chapter 15. Is He Serious? The train station was packed full as multitude of students returned to Hogwarts after winter halls. As Regulus stood next to his brother and watched the general chaos around him, he searched for familiar faces. His fingers stroked his green and silver tie anxiously, internally panicking that he would no longer fit in with his Slytherin counterparts after a long 2 weeks surrounded by obnoxious Gryffindors. Not that he ever fit in there either. "Regulus!" Pandora squealed, bursting from the train car, and bounded across the platform. She attacked him with a tight hug, then grinned up at him excitedly. "Did you have a good holiday? Have they corrupted you?" she asked eagerly, eyeing the 4 Gryffindors with pure mischief. He laughed lightly, relieved that Pandora could see right through him. It would save him a great deal of explanation later on if he was partly transparent. As they talked, Regulus noticed Potter studying him intently from the corner of his eyes, watching his hands slip up and down the length of his tie. Ignoring him, Regulus dropped the tie and followed Pandora on board, guiding his trunk along with him. The last 2 days of halls, Regulus spent in a strange sort of limbo with the group. Potter remained at his side as much as possible, subtly shifting his attention from one black brother to the other. No one seemed to take much notice, though. Remus and Sirius were completely caught up with each other, while Peter was thrilled to have company of any kind. Though he hated to admit it, Potter wore him down. By the end, it was entirely too much effort to fight him, as Peter predicted, the clever git. No official decision was made, and Regulus asserted himself that when he returned to safety of Hogwarts and the hallowed hiding places he often burrowed into, he wouldn't have to make it at all. Potter would lose interest in him when he was out of sight, and Regulus could return to his lonely brooding. Granted, he'd agreed to think about it, and he'd done nothing but. A part of him wished it was possible, that he would step that far outside of himself and take such a risk. Another part of him panicked at the concept entirely. He wanted to say yes, but he knew he should say no. The holiday break wasn't entirely wasted. He and Sirius were on far better terms. Even if his original goal was unfinished, an unexpected twist was simply added to the plan. He should have just assumed Potter would make his life uncomfortable and complicated. Barty said his holiday was horrid. His father was a right git the entire time, degrading him for everything, Pandora explained. She rolled her eyes. Never liked the man, but the way his mother just stands there and takes it. Honestly, I just want to shake her back to her senses and tell her to run for it. Which of her time haven't been dismissed, stepping past them in a hall. My mom is the same. They were raised to believe wizards should run things. Loads of bollocks, that is. My dad's done nothing but run our family into the dirt. Pandora nodded sagely in agreement. As the 3 of them stepped into their usual compartment, Regulus startled to see a Gryffindor tie seated next to Dorcas. His eyebrows shot up his forehead when he recognized the head girl above the tie. Glancing at Pandora, she was given a half shrug. The Ravenclaw tended towards the acceptance of strange things, rather than questioning them. Jumping up and down his seat, Barty began loading their trunks up to the racks with his wand. He settled them in neatly before dragging Regulus into a seat next to him. Pandora followed, sitting in his opposite side and straightening her blue and bronze tie proudly. As he glanced around the car, Regulus realized they were only missing a Hufflepuff in their contingent of a full set. Surely he could rectify that himself, in theory, anyway. "What's this about, then?" Evan asked, eyeing the head girl cautiously. His gaze darted to Dorcas for an explanation. Dorcas smiled benignly, clearly unconcerned. "Evans is here to see you, Black." Surprised, Regulus blinked rapidly at her before turning to Evans. "Why?" "I'd hope to speak with you privately," Evans began, an earnest expression on her face. "However, Miss Meadows won't allow it. As your 7th-year Slytherin prefect, I respect her concerns." Smiling genuinely, Dorcas bumped her shoulder. "As you should." Evans met her grin with one of his own. "You've proven yourself, Meadows. I trust your judgment, especially of your own." "Good. The feeling is mutual, now that you've dumped that snake," she teased. "Let's not discuss my incredibly poor judge of character, shall we? At least not in front of the young ones," Evans replied glibly, her gaze landing on a 4th-year tucked in the corner. "Fair request," Dorcas nodded. She stood up and waved curtly at Regulus. "Up you get, Black. We need to find an empty carriage." Regulus followed the pair out of the car, glancing back at Bozzy and Evan with a shrug. Evans and Dorcas continued their companionable discussion down the hallway. Regulus gleaned enough from the conversation to realize the two were rather friendly. He kept his thoughts to himself, but was more than a little surprised by the development. Dorcas wasn't all that impressed with Gryffindors overall, although Evans was far less reckless than the rest of them. Sweeping her hand inside the carriage near the end of the train, Dorcas waited for Evans and Regulus to enter first, before following them inside. She locked the door and promptly set a muffling charm. Regulus slipped into the corner of the bench and watched the pair warily. With no context, this meeting had an ominous tone to it. "Now, Mr. Black," Evans began, her voice formal and stern. "I understand you spent the halls with the Potters and their assorted friends." Dorcas' lips twitched in amusement. "Funny you failed to mention that before we left." Regulus furrowed his brows. "Why, is that any of your concern? You realize that Potter and his friends are primarily cause of chaos in Hogwarts, correct?" Evans asked, tilting her head to the side. "Your brother is very much included in their pranks." "I am aware of that, yes," Regulus conceded, still thoroughly confused. "He's still my brother, though, and I wanted to spend halls with him, rather than be stuck alone in the castle." Evans smiled softly. "I understand. Sibling relationships can be complicated. I imagine it's been especially so when you're sorted in different houses." "I'm unconcerned with house rivalries," Regulus deadpanned. He truly couldn't care less about the house points or house cup. It was simply a poor concealed attempt at pitting the students against each other. Generally speaking, he found the compensation based on arbitrary personality traits rather stupid. "It's true," Dorcas agreed. "Black makes no attempt to earn house points, despite his exceedingly high marks in potion and charms. If anything, his obsession with isolation costs us more. Always late for curfew," she winked at Regulus. For good reasons, I hope." Regulus stared at her blankly, unwilling to acknowledge the accusation of the ribbing. The last thing he intended to do in this impromptu meeting was establishing some sort of camaraderie with Evans. The head girl was hardly someone he felt he needed to impress or befriend. If anything, he'd done everything within his power to avoid her, even more so than the head boy. Not that he cared to analyze that particular detail at the moment, or ever. Shifting in his seat, Evans studied him curiously before getting to the point. She tucked a hand in her pocket and pulled out a small pin, handing it to Dorcas after a curious examination. Dorcas nodded and handed it back to her. Evans palmed the pin and then offered it to Regulus. "I'd like you to be the 6th-year Slytherin prefect for the remainder of the year." His gaze dropped to her palm and then lifted to her face. I'll pass. Black, she's being polite, Dorcas admonished, her voice stern. You don't actually have a choice, and neither does she. Inhaling deeply, he crossed his arms over his chest. Is this punishment for going to the Potters, then? How are you two related? How are the two related? Evans sighed. I'll be honest with you, Black. I don't know. She held out the pin more firmly. All I was told was that the current 6th-year Slytherin prefect was no longer attending Hogwarts and that you were chosen as replacement. Regulus straightened up, eyes narrowing. What happened to Smith? His parents advised the headmaster that he wouldn't be returning. Dorcas answered promptly. She took the pin from Evans and slapped it into Regulus's hand. Welcome to the team, Black. You hate every minute of it, I assure you. Professor McGonagall mentioned in her letter that the headmaster was aware of your holiday plans and suggested to Professor Slughorn that you were a suitable replacement. Evans offered holding her palms up in supplication. Professor Slughorn readily agreed. Dorcas snorted derisively. Of course he did. Old Sluggy didn't want to waste time wading through students' files or sort the matter out himself. Come now. Evans pressed the back of her hand against her lips as she fought back a laugh. Shaking her head, she released an amused breath and refocused on Regulus. I mentioned your visit with the Potters because you will definitely be targeted by the 4 of them. They tend to harass prefects more than anyone else. However, you will also have access to Prefect Lou, which is a nice perk. I'm not bothered with my brother or his friends, Regulus replied flatly. Sirius is well aware of the conquest of interfering with me. His gaze flicked over. S is the head boy. Oh, I see, Evans replied, sitting back against the bench. What exactly would those consequences be? Regulus smirked. I'll hex their bollocks off. Dorcas burst out laughing, clapping her hands together as she collapsed against the seat. She wiped at the corner of her eyes and pointed at him. That's why we love you, Black. Is he serious? Evans checked, eyes wide. No, I'm Regulus, he deadpanned, arching an eyebrow. The breath Evans sucked in was equal parts exasperated and amused. She'd clearly had the pun entirely too often, but hadn't expected it from him. To be fair, it was beneath him, but he'd spent 2 solid weeks around a pack of fools. He couldn't be expected to be his best immediately afterwards. Right, she said, rising to her feet. Marauders, as always, it was nice to see you. I'll let myself out. Evan undid the lock on the door and exited, closing it quietly behind her. Dirks grinned. All right, Black, explain yourself. What did you do to piss off or impress Dumbledore? She folded her arms over her chest and eyed him curiously. If he knows you at all, this is a punishment. If he doesn't, it's a reward. He doesn't, Regulus huffed, staring down at the pen. Probably thinks I'll control my brother. Unlikely. Dumbledore finds him entertaining, Dorcas corrected. More likely he's hoping Potter will influence you. Regulus's head snapped up. What? Why? She smirked. Oh, that got your attention. Have you changed your tune on the head boy then? 2 weeks on the house and you were a big fan? No, of course not, Regulus refuted, desperately hoping his face wasn't as red as it felt. Dorcas grinned lasciviously. You're a terrible liar, Black. Might want to work on that. She nodded towards his hand pointedly. Put it on. We have to join the other prefects. Now? We just got on board, he protested, shoulders dropping. Now, put it on. Dorcas insisted, her deep brown eyes piercing as she stared at him. He knew better than to argue. She was sensuous on a good day. Regulus glanced down at his chest as the affixed the pin to his robes. The silver was rather heavy and pulled his robes uncomfortably. He hated it already. Dorcas led the way out of an empty compartment and down the other end of the train. It wasn't until he stepped into the Prefect's compartment behind her that Regulus remembered Potter would be there too. His face lit up when he spotted Regulus and winked. So much for being discreet. "All right, everyone," Evans called, waving her hand up in the air. "A couple of quick notes before you begin your round. We have a new Slytherin 6th-year prefect, Regulus Black. He's finishing out the year for Smith. Please make him feel welcome." She waited for the group to settle back down before continuing. "Secondly, I want to remind you to have all of your schedule requests handed in to Potter before the end of the week. He's agreed to handle the scheduling as we approach news for some reason." Edith looked completely bewildered by that decision, though she avoided looking at Potter directly. "Thirdly, due an uptick of political attacks on the Muggles, be prepared to comfort Muggle bonds in your houses. It's a very dangerous time for their families, and we must serve as examples, as well as friends," she insisted, nodding at each of them. "If you find yourself with an inconsolable little one, bring them to me. I'll help them." Evan smiled concernedly at the group. "Now, you may begin your rounds. Mr. Black, if you would remain, please. Meadows, you as well, if you'd prefer." "He's on his own now," Dorcas declined, shaking her head. "I just didn't want him to hex you for his unexpected promotion. That was for your safety, Evans, not his." She promptly turned and exited the carriage. Eyeing Regulus warily, Evans frowned. "I hope you're not intent on causing trouble, Black." He ignored her, watching out the window instead. This was probably the worst day he'd had in a very long time. Prefects were expected to do a ton of extra work for nothing, and often were the first to be blamed by heads of houses. When things went awry, it was quite possibly the last position he'd intended to find himself in. "Potter, can you handle this?" Evans checked, glancing from Regulus to the head boy in concern. Nodding avidly, Potter smiled. "Of course I can." "Go on, Evans." The moment the door closed, Potter was on his side. "I didn't hear until I got on the train. This is brilliant." He grinned down at Regulus. "Especially if you finally say yes. It's so much easier to sneak around prefects, and I can schedule us together for rounds." "Grand," Regulus replied helplessly. He suddenly overwhelmed by the idea. All of that time alone with Potter. Grand was right. "What's wrong? You don't want it?" Potter asked, leaning down to meet his eyes. He shook his head dejectedly. "No, I don't. It's just more work, and drags far too much attention to me. It's better if I slink into the shadows and disappear." "Regulus, you'll be fine," Potter insisted, dropping down to the bench. He tugged Regulus's sleeve insistently and sat him next to him. "Don't worry, all right. It's not as bad as it sounds." Glancing up at him, Regulus fiddled with the badge. "I hate it already." Potter chuckled and pulled his wand. "Let me fix it." He tapped the badge and then grinned. "Is that better?" Startled by the sudden change in weight, Regulus stared down at the badge. It looked exactly the same, but was far lighter. He frowned, trying to examine it more closely. "What did you do?" "Made it thin. That way it won't pull on your rope so much. Plus, it doesn't bother Remus," Potter explained, then quickly pressed his lips together. His eyebrows slid upwards of its own violation. "Why would my badge bother Remus?" Potter flinched and shrugged. "I don't know exactly. He thinks Silver is bulky and gets annoyed by it." He quickly changed the subject. "So, does it feel better?" "Yes, actually," Regulus admitted, ducking his head. "Thanks." He'd given up challenging every word from the other bloke's mouth, finding it much easier to accept defeat. Potter was entirely too charismatic for Regulus's limited willpower, at least for now. "Good. Let's start on rounds then, yeah?" "All right." thank you for watching or listening or whatever to this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I had really much trouble with recording this. I just don't feel very good today, so I'm sorry if that bothered you. And I hope it will go better next time. I had to re-record the start like 5 times because it went just wrong. I hope this time it's fine, and I hope it didn't bother you too much. Have a very nice day or night or anything. Depends on what time zone you're in. If you want to read ahead, I'll put the link in the description as always. Well, bye.